my dudes, my name is Tiffany. I've been talking about my journey paying off my credit card debt and my student loan debt. So today I am here to kind of just discuss student loan debt in particular. And I want to address questions like, is student debt worth it? And how much debt is maybe too much debt? So these are kind of general things that I've gotten from my own experience and advice that I kind of definitely wish I had known before I started my college process. And of course, this is from the perspective of the United States because I can't speak to the student loan or financial aid systems in any other country. So let's get into it. First of all, I think our system, our higher education system in the US is ridiculous. It's obviously far too expensive. I believe that public college should be tuition free. But anyway, we have to deal with the system that we currently have until we can change it. So the best thing that you can do to, I guess, protect yourself from your own student debt crisis is to be very careful about how much debt you take out in the first place. Okay, so our first major question, are you sure that you want to go to college? Are you ready and committed? Are you mature enough to handle it? Are you academically ready to get through a college course load? It makes me so mad that it is assumed that college is the right thing for every student, and that at 17 years old, every child is expected to know what they want to do for the rest of their lives and be able to make this very complicated decision that has a huge impact on their future. I am so mad that college advisors or high school advisors don't talk about the other options that students have other than just going straight to a four-year school. First thing I would recommend is for everyone to consider community college. I didn't consider community college and I really wish I had. I think whether you are ready for a four-year school or not, community college is a great option for everybody. It's gonna be most likely way more affordable than going straight to a four-year college. And there's also less financial risk. Say you start college at a community college or at a four-year and you realize, I don't think college is right for me, or maybe I wanna switch majors. At a community college, because it costs less, there's less risk rather than going to a more expensive four-year school and having those choices literally cost you more money, if that makes sense. Second recommendation, consider a gap year. I took a gap year after high school and it was great. I've also taken more gap years accidentally throughout my college process. I think gap years are great because you can work, get a job, earn money, get used to managing money. You can kind of practice being an adult, basically. Most likely you'll still be living at home, but I think a lot of students don't have a lot of work experience before starting college, and this can really give you a great perspective, teach you the value of money before you sign up for those loans. And also it can give you the time to explore yourself, learn more about yourself, do some hobbies, and that might be helpful in guiding you toward what major you should choose. Also, of course, you could use your gap year to save up for college, so that would be another benefit. Another thing to possibly consider, going to university abroad. This was definitely tempting to me, and I wish I had looked deeper into it, but there are a number of countries that have either low cost or free tuition, even for international students. So if that's something that is at all tempting to you, research it, look into it. Even with flights and visas and housing and everything, sometimes that can cost less than going to a school in the US. So it's worth looking into. Other options, you could consider going to a trade school. You could consider going into the military. I just think there are so many other options and so many other ways to spend the time after high school rather than just rushing into college because you feel like and you're pressured to think that that is the only acceptable option. It's not. A lot of people want to go straight to college because they think that all of their peers are doing that and they don't want to be behind. But consider this. You could be a 21 or 22-year-old who has graduated with about $30,000 in debt. Maybe you have a degree in a major that you're not even that passionate about anymore, or maybe you can't find a job in that major. Or you could be 21 or 22 with no debt, with work experience, life experience, and you could be starting college and be much more sure of what you're actually interested in studying. Another benefit of waiting a few years is that if you're 24 during any time of your college years, you get the benefit of being an independent student in terms of the FAFSA. So dependent students have to input their parents' financial information, and once you are considered an independent student, only your income is considered. So most likely you could end up getting more financial aid. So this is all very personal to me because my process has taken me a while, and I will be 25 by the time I graduate with my bachelor's degree next December. But I'm realizing that this has been really important for me, and I would not be in my major right now that I'm so passionate about. That was not the major that I wanted to do when I was 18 or 19. So anyway, I just think there are a lot of benefits to taking it slow. Anyway, back to my main question. Are you sure? Are you ready? The same thing applies to grad school. I do know some people who have gone to grad school right after undergrad because they are not ready to get a job yet, or they just assume that they need to go to grad school to be able to get a good job, so it's like the default option. But grad school is not something to jump into lightly, especially when it comes to finances. I've just heard so many student loan horror stories that most of their problems and debt comes from grad school, so I think it's very important to be 100% sure that you need to go to grad school and that it will be very beneficial for you and worth the investment, and also that the financial impact is not too much for you. I would maybe even recommend trying to do some work maybe for a year or two before you consider grad school, just so that you kind of know whether or not it's really necessary or would be very helpful for you. Finally, if you do decide that yes, you are ready to go to college, whether that is undergrad or whether you want to continue at grad school, we often hear that there are a lot of different factors that go into college choice. You know, do you want a big or small campus? Do you want something with a lot of extracurricular activities or Greek life? But really, I think the one major key factor that we need to put the most weight into is affordability. And of course, that's not the fun factor, but like when it comes to your college choice's impact on your life, affordability is everything. So again, when you're 17 or 18, you're applying to colleges for the first time, you'll probably be thinking very emotionally. You're gonna make choices based on emotion rather than logic. So you may have a dream school. You may think, I love this school. I love the idea of going to this school. I love the prestige of this school. But you probably aren't thinking, what if I end up hating it here and I want to transfer? How difficult will it be if I do end up wanting to transfer? What if you chose a certain school for one specific major and then you start that major and realize you don't like that major, you want to change majors, and then you have no reason to be at that school? I could do a whole rant about dream schools, and I completely understand why people have these emotional connections to schools, especially if it has been a literal dream of yours for so many years of your life. But it's very important not to let that vision of a dream school cloud your judgment. A lot of people have gone to their dream school and sometimes ended up having a terrible time, and then on top of that, had a crazy load of debt. And by the end of that, you may not think that it was worth it to go to that dream school. I hope this video is not scaring you. Anyway, I recommend overall just going to the most affordable school for you, something that makes sense financially. I know that a lot of people think that they have to go to certain schools to have a good experience, but I think you'd be surprised that you could probably have a great experience at almost any school, and you may even have a better experience because you would be there at an affordable school knowing that you're not putting yourself in a deep hole of debt. Because you can go to a great school, but if the whole time you're thinking, I'm gonna graduate with $80,000 of debt, you might not be able to enjoy it that much. So when it comes to finding an affordable school, obviously research is important. You need to figure out what federal aid you're eligible for, state aid, school-specific or major-specific aid. You probably won't know the whole picture of what your financial aid packages will look like until you're accepted and actually get them from each school, but you should have a rough idea of what to expect. Generally, for most students, going to an in-state public school is going to be the most affordable option, but if you are very strong academically, you might be able to look into more selective schools that are able to fulfill a higher percentage of need. Some fulfill like 90% or even 100% of your financial needs. So if you can get into those schools and you're willing to move kind of anywhere around the country, that's definitely a good option to look into. Finally, another big question: how much debt can you handle? How much student debt is manageable? The thing is, I think student loans and debt in general can feel very abstract, especially when you're 17 or 18, you probably haven't made much money in your life. It's just hard to imagine that amount of money and think about actually paying it back. So for me, for example, I took a gap year because I was worried about student loans, and then I ended up going to school the next year. I went to a private university called Loyola New Orleans, which has very inflated tuition. But anyway, I got my financial aid package and I basically basically was supposed to take out about $10,000 a year in loans. So I was estimating about $40,000 by the time I would graduate. And at that time I was like, you know what, that seems manageable. $40,000 seems good. It had taken me 2 years to pay off my $3,000 car. And suddenly I was 19 and I was okay with signing up for $40,000 in loans. But that's kind of around the average student loan debt, so I thought, that's not crazy, that's fine, I can handle it. The thing is, I would have ended up paying much more than $40,000. $40,000 would just be the amount that I took out. And the thing is, I feel like we all look at our student loans at face value. Like, we estimate what they should be by the time we graduate, but we don't factor in how much we will actually end up paying by the end of the 10-year repayment period with all of that interest. So really for me, if I took out $40,000 in loans, I would end up paying probably $50,000 by the time the 10 years was over. So I think it's really important for people to look at their financial aid packages and factor in all of the interest that they can expect to pay. Also, I find it ridiculous that we're all just okay with taking 10 years to pay off our student debt. Because again, that's the usual, that's the average, that's what's expected. Suddenly we're like, yeah, that's fine. But think about it. Being shackled by your student debts for a decade is actually not that great of a financial move. Wow, actually 10 years isn't even typical. The Department of Education reports that the typical repayment period for borrowers with between $20,000 and $40,000 in federal student loans is 20 years. Everything is a lie. When we are thinking and imagining, what our student loan payoff experience is going to be, it's so much worse than that in reality, and that is really scary. So also, people tend to justify the cost of their degree in terms of what it's worth, in terms of connections or networking, Yes, this degree will cost me $80,000, but think of all the connections I'll make, all the networking, I'm definitely gonna get a great paying job when I graduate. 100%. No, nothing is guaranteed, and I don't think any amount of networking would make me feel safe enough to take out that much of debt, There definitely are schools and, groups and things that you can get involved in that do result in really great connections and networking opportunities that could get you a high-paying job, but I think it's really important to kind of imagine the worst case scenario when you're taking out your student loans. Instead of assuming that you're just gonna get a $60,000 a year job right out of the gate, you need to think, okay, what if I graduate and I can't get a great job? What if I'm working a minimum wage job or I have an entry-level job? What if I'm making like $30,000 a year? What are my payments gonna be at that point? Is that gonna be manageable? We really, really need to make our expectations realistic and play on the safe side rather than the most optimistic. So when you get your financial aid package, how much in loans is the school asking you to take out? Here's some fun little facts. Basically, federal loans are limited for undergrad students. So they have a limit per year of how much you can take out. I think it kind of goes between $4,000 when you're a freshman and slowly increases up to maybe $6,000 or $7,000 a year. And then you can add Parent Plus loans, which are usually used to cover the difference. Obviously your parents are on the hook for that. And then there's also private student loans that are another option. But it's very important to consider the types of loans that you're being asked to take out, being recommended, and the interest rates on those. So for me, I had federal student loans, I had some subsidized, which means that the government pays my interest while I'm in school. And then I had some unsubsidized loans. And I think the average of my interest rates on those loans are 4% maybe. Parent Plus loans, which I also have an interest rate averaging about 7%, and then private loans have an average interest rate of 8%. So you need to be really, really careful when it comes to especially those higher interest rate loans. I would say I do not recommend private student loans at all. I think if you are looking at your financial aid package and it requires you to take out private loans, I would say you can't afford that. I wouldn't risk that. But then Parent Plus loans have almost a similar interest rate, so I really would recommend keeping those to a limited amount as well. So I'm gonna give you some examples. Last year, I got accepted to a ton of amazing schools, but I applied to all private schools and they were all expensive, and my stupid ass was expecting generous financial aid packages, and I did not get that. I couldn't go to any of those schools because I couldn't afford them at all. Loyola Marymount University in LA recommended $9,500 in loans, and there was still a remaining balance of $6,600. So I would have needed to get either a Parent Plus loan or a private loan to cover that. So that's over $16,000 just to cover tuition. That's not even including rent, like room and board, any of the other expenses. $16,000 just for tuition for 1 year. No. And by the way, when I was transferring, I would need about 2-ish more years of school, so yikes. NYU. I was so excited to get into NYU. I felt really good about myself. Kind of that dream school scenario, but it wasn't like really a dream school. It just boosted my ego. But then I got my financial aid package. After grants and scholarships, tuition would cost me $40,000 a year in loans. Again, not including the cost of living to live in New York City. Whew. Yes, I learned my lesson. Don't apply to private, very expensive schools, especially if you're a low-income student, obviously. By the way though, one thing was I was banking on a scholarship that I applied to. I applied to the Taco Bell scholarship and I was hoping that I would win, I don't know, like $20,000 a year. I would not recommend banking on winning random scholarships. Of course, I would recommend applying for them. It's always great to apply and shoot your shot and see if you can win some extra money, but don't factor that into your financial plan because it's not guaranteed. If you do win any extra scholarships, that just means you can take out a little bit less in loans. So anyway, ideally, I think that your financial aid package should completely cover your tuition.
So that's kind of ignorant of me to say because I'm just saying that as somebody who has applied as a low-income student and with a pretty high academic achievement. Therefore, I've been offered a lot of like merit scholarships, but I get that if you are not a top student, you're not going to be offered that same amount of financial aid, and it obviously depends on your family's financial situation as well. So I know it's not possible for everyone, but as close to that as you can get is ideal.
And then at least part of your living expenses. So a lot of people need additional loans to be able to help cover room and board, meal plans, stuff like that. And by the way, don't automatically accept all of the loans that a school recommends to you because they could recommend thousands more than you actually need to take out. Some students just completely live off of their loans, their refunds, and they end up just taking out thousands and thousands more than they needed to and just spending it. So I would not recommend that. So then any leftover expenses, if your family is contributing, that's where that would come in. And then you can do work study or another job to bridge the gap. So another example, my little brother is a sophomore in college now. He's taking out about $6,000 a year in loans. His tuition is completely covered by scholarships and grants, which is great. So then his loans every year really just go toward helping him afford rent, room and board. He's also working to help pay for his other expenses. So he'll graduate with $24,000 in loans, which is still a significant amount, but that's with his tuition covered. But again, I think that's really important when you're looking at your financial aid package. Don't just factor in covering tuition because often living expenses are what ends up being like the most difficult thing to pay for as a student. So I totally understand why students need to take out a little bit extra in loans to help cover some of their rent or expenses, but I wouldn't recommend taking out loans to cover all of it if you're able to work to bridge that gap, if that makes sense. While you're in school, what should you be doing? As recommended by lots of people, I would recommend paying the interest on your loans while you're in school. So again, as I mentioned, you might have some subsidized loans, meaning the government is paying your interest while you're in school, but for any unsubsidized loans, pay that interest. It's really not a huge amount and it's totally worth it to keep those balances down. Because if you let the interest grow while you're in school for 4 years, you leave school and you will be shocked at how much interest has accrued just in that amount of time. So if you are like me, and maybe you're watching this video right now, maybe you're a freshman or a sophomore and realizing you might be a little in over your head. You might have agreed to take out too much in loans and you're thinking, should I continue this all the way through the rest of this degree? So for me, even in my freshman year, I realized that that school probably wasn't the best fit for me. And by my sophomore year, I realized, yeah, I want to leave, I want to transfer, and I think I want to change my major. If you think your school is too expensive, or it's otherwise not worth it for you, transfer. It's gonna take time and effort. It's gonna suck to transfer. It's a whole complicated process, but it's worth it, especially if you end up in a better place, in a better major, and saving more money. It's much better to do that, go through the hassle of transferring, rather than stick through 4 years and screw over your future self. So again, my original plan, I was okay with taking out about $40,000 by the time I would graduate. But in my first 2 years, I already took out $27,000 in loans. The big increase was because I studied abroad at the end of my sophomore year, so it cost a lot more than a typical semester would. It was worth it, but extremely expensive. So then I really would have probably graduated with more like $45,000 or $50,000 in loans, which is just unthinkable. So instead of continuing, I stopped, I took another year off. I ended up taking a year and a half off actually to reapply, see where I could transfer, and I ended up in New York City. I'm now going to a public school, part of the CUNY system. It is like some of the most affordable public colleges. I think tuition's only like $7,000 in state per year. So my financial aid covers all of my tuition, and I get extra disbursements left over for other expenses like books and things. So also, I've been able to pay down my loans while I was taking that year and a half off, and now while I'm in school. And I have about $18,000 of the $27,000 I took out left to pay. And that is just such a major difference. I could have either graduated last year with $50,000 in debt versus graduating next year with hopefully very little debt, because I plan on paying off all or most of my loans by the time I graduate next December. So it's a crazy difference. It was totally worth the time. Paying it off, let's talk about it. This is the real juicy part. Juicy is a gross word. Okay, so the average student loan debt is about $30,000. And I'm gonna talk about minimum payments right now. So if you just have a regular federal student loan, they average about 4% interest rates. At $30,000 in loans, you would be paying about $304 a month for that 10-year repayment period. And you'd end up paying a total of $36,448, which means $6,448 of that is interest. If you had $30,000 in loans and did an income-based repayment plan, say you're making $35,000 in income, you would pay between $145 to $304 a month. It would take you 14 years and 9 months to pay that off. In total, you'd pay $41,366. $11,366 of that is just interest. Then grad school. Again, I mentioned grad school can be the most expensive and put you in the most debt, more so than undergrad. The average grad school debt is $50,000 for a master's degree, which is on top of any of your undergrad debt. There are a lot of factors that go into this, but generally there's less financial aid for grad school. Interest rates for grad students are higher, and borrowing limits for grad students are higher. So you can take out all of the money that you need to go to grad school, but more loans is not necessarily a great idea. So my big recommendation when you are paying off your student loans is to pay more than the minimum. It's very obvious, but I'm frankly shocked at the number of people who are able to pay more than the minimums but choose not to. Student loan lenders are very sneaky, and I think they try to get us to actually pay the minimum amount, smaller and smaller minimums, because it means they'll end up making more money and interest off of us in the long run. So you may think, oh cool, instead of paying $300 a month, I can pay $200 a month. That's great. But in the long run, you're gonna pay way more, so it's not a good thing. If you can afford to pay more than the minimum, do it. It's gonna make a big difference. Especially for people who are lucky enough to graduate and get a decent paying job. If you have extra disposable income, even just $100 a month, you need to be putting that toward your student loans. I think we need to change our post-grad culture. And I know that people struggle in being able to find a job that's good paying or find a good job at all. But again, for the people who do find a decent job, we need to make it the standard to focus and hunker down on paying off our student loans. So back to that example I just said, a federal student loan, $30,000, 4% interest rate, paying about $300 a month for 10 years. If you were to pay an extra $100 a month, you would pay that off almost 3 years earlier. So it would take you 85 months instead of 119, and you would pay $1,870 less in interest just from paying an extra $100 a month. Again, if you've graduated and gotten a good job and you can afford that extra $100, It may mean sacrificing a little bit in other areas of your life, but in the grand scheme of things, $100 a month is so worth it. And then, you can look at other calculators and see if you could pay an extra $50 or an extra $200 a month. Whatever amount that you can push yourself to pay extra is going to help you so much. Those are basically my thoughts. I hope that this video was helpful for you. Basically, my summary is be very, very, very careful and take out the minimum amount of student loans as possible, only if you're sure that you're really ready to go to college. And then once it's time to pay it back, hustle. I'm not into hustle culture, but like when it comes to debt payoff, I think it's really important for us to change our perspectives on that and try to pay it off as fast as possible rather than stretching it out, letting it happen over 10 years. It's not worth doing that to your future self. A couple of people asked about refinancing or consolidating loans, and I don't really know much about that, so I'm just gonna link some information in the description. It really depends on the type of loans that you have and the interest rates on those. So read about it, research, think very carefully before you consolidate or refinance. But it is an option, and it's a good option for some people. Last thing, what about if student loan debt gets forgiven? I think some people, because that policy has been floated by politicians like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren and some others, I think some people are like, well, maybe I can hold back and just wait for that to be passed because that'd be great. But obviously it is not a good idea to wait for politicians to pass a policy on anything. If anything, it would probably take years and years. It would be better for you to just continue as normal, paying off your loans and your debt as fast as possible. Again, as I said, I hope to pay off my $18,000 of loans in the next year or two. And if student loan forgiveness gets passed soon after that, I'm not gonna feel bad about it. I'm not gonna feel like I wasted my money because I'm in a position where I'm able to pay my loans, so I'm happy to do that. But in general, I'm totally in favor of that policy. I think the student loan crisis is just devastating. It has ruined so many lives, and I don't think people deserve to get in this debt that's impossible to get out of because of predatory lending and these interest rates that are insanely high. I think if student loan debt was forgiven, young people and older people who still have student loan debt would be in such a better position to save for themselves, emergency funds, save for a home, save for retirement. But then again, that is why I am so passionate about trying to spread this message to people who are not in college yet, who are considering it, who are in college but still have time to change things, or you've graduated and you've got this debt and you need to deal with it. I want people to be informed about finances and feel empowered, and even if you have a huge amount of debt, to know that there are lots of things that you can do to get out of it. And I don't want anybody to feel hopeless. If you want a really inspiring journey, I would check out Asia Dang. She actually just recently paid off all of her student loan debt, which is crazy. I've been watching her for probably about 2 years since she was publicly talking about her student loan debt, which again, mostly came from grad school. She had almost $200,000 in debt. And yes, she is an influencer. She's been making a lot of money, which is not relatable, but she's been working her ass off, and I do admire that she has stuck to this goal. Regardless of how much money you're making, it's hard to be in debt payoff mode and be sacrificing for years and years, but it's totally worth it. She easily could have still ignored her debt, put it to the back of her mind, continued paying minimums. She could have enjoyed all of that money she was making, but ultimately she's done something that's way better for her present and future, and now she will be able to focus on actually saving money and building up her net worth because she is free from the shackles of debt. So that's that. I really hope this was interesting and helpful to you guys, and I hope that you're all doing well. Let's continue to learn and talk about money and be open and help each other, and hopefully, I don't know how to end this. Okay, that's all. Okay, thanks, bye.